Hey everyone, and welcome to this quick video which is going to be talking about good decision making and how we can improve the way that we make decisions around digital design, data and technology within our organisations, and why that's so important to making a success of your digital approach. So before I get into that, I just want to quickly promote something that I've been working on, which is this Digital Success online course that's going to be launching any moment now. And it takes place over 6 weeks. It's all online. It's a mixture of group work, live and asynchronous sort of reflective work and conversation. There's some one-to-ones in there as well, and it covers all the things that you would imagine such a course would cover. And it's only £299, which is an absolute bargain. If you want to find out more, then visit that link there on the screen, which I will also stick in so that it's more clickable in all the places that you're likely to see this video. My name's Dave Briggs. I run a company called Sensible Tech, which is basically made up of just me, and I've been doing digital and IT stuff within local public services for a really long time now. I do a bit of interim work and also some freelance projects, mostly with councils, but occasionally with charities and some suppliers as well. And one of the things I've been working on recently is trying to get all of my sort of experience and all the things that I've learned into an open, free quality model for local government digital. So you might call it a maturity model, but I just don't like those words. And that's really providing a framework for all the work that I'm doing at the minute, whether it's consulting or whether it's doing training. And indeed, it really helps with these videos as well. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, then you can have a look at dq.sensibletech.co.uk. So let's get into the guts of this then. What do I mean by decision making? So it's really how organisations decide what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, and who will be doing it. So pretty basic stuff. Now, obviously, my specific interest in all of this is around in the digital space. Okay, and just so you know, as a bit of shorthand, when I say the word digital, what I'm really saying is digital design, data and technology. So all of those things I think fit into that thing. And I'll just say digital from now on, probably just to make it a bit quicker and less boring. But a lot of what I'm going to be saying, even though that's my specific interest, is going to be applicable across all sorts of different activities that organisations get up to, I'm sure. So what does it involve? Well, it involves people making simple requests all the way up to, wanting to request substantial change programs. It's all about prioritising and reprioritising work. It's about dealing with emergencies. And also, fundamentally, really good decision-making approaches, they need proper service design. We're not just talking about creating a new form for people to be able to make their requests. And a hat tip on that point, when I was putting these slides together, funnily enough, my friend Steph Gray happened to put a message up on Blue Sky saying exactly that point. I was like, I'm having that, but I do need to give him a little bit of credit, I think. So what's the issue with decision making in an awful lot of organisations and, in my experience in local councils too? Well, most of the time, decision making, particularly around this digital stuff, doesn't really work very well. People don't understand exactly how they're supposed to ask for things or how to get things improved. There's often really onerous forms. Things take too long to decide and they get prioritised away in the distant future. There's a lack of understanding of exactly what's being worked on, why that's being done instead of the hundreds of other things that could be being done. That oftentimes, this is a really key thing that often gets mixed, is that people in digital are often finding themselves making prioritisation decisions that really ought to be being made way higher up the food chain. Why is it in digital that they're deciding whether the new thing that the waste service is asking for and why that's taking precedence over what the people in adult social care really need? They shouldn't be making those decisions. It should be happening much higher up the organisation. And as a result of an awful lot of this stuff, people end up doing their best to avoid the decision-making approach that's in place, and they go and do their own thing. And usually that ends in disaster as well. So the outcome, of all of this is that current decision-making approaches often produce poor decisions that are poorly implemented. And that then results in poor digital work and poor outcomes for people, and everyone is quite sad. So what does good decision making look like? It's proportionate. So it's not asking you to do too much in order to get your request in place. It's open and transparent, so everybody knows what to do in order to make requests and things like that, and they also know what's going on, and why it is perhaps that things aren't happening as quickly as they would like it to. It involves the right people at the right times making the right level of decision. It's based on commonly accepted and articulated principles, so people know why decisions are being made in the way that they are. Good decision making helps to achieve strategic goals, so you don't get bogged down in operational issues. It's future proofed. So a good decision is one that will either, be able to last for a certain amount of time, or where if it's a little bit more short-termist, you've got an exit strategy. So, it is going to be future-proofed, even if you know that this decision isn't going to last forever. And at the end of the day, it produces the right results and the right outcomes. So I'm going to go through a few of these little bits now, the ones that I think are the most important. And the first one for me is that governance needs to be proportionate. This is so, so important. So the golden rule for me for governance and decision making, this is the thing that I think needs printing on t-shirts and mouse mats and all that kind of stuff. Make it less work to follow than it is to avoid. So, if it's always going to be easier for people to just pick up the phone to someone they know, or ping through an email, or just shout at someone to get something to happen, they will do that if going through the proper channels is going to be more difficult to do than that. So don't make people fill in huge business cases unless or until they really, really have to. Start by asking the least amount of information needed to get to the next stage, and then just build up as it goes along. Equally important, though, is not to let things slip through the net. And one of my biggest bugbears when I've been managing in digital teams is the concept of business as usual, BAU, and the idea that sometimes it always takes precedence, and that, often BAU requests are relatively simple and straightforward. In my experience, they almost never are, and pretty much like 90% of BAU requests are actually projects at the end of the day. And we often find that things that go slip through the net in terms of being BAU requests end up being really complicated, annoying, and quite depressing for everybody involved. Another really important thing to consider is who is making decisions. This goes back to that point I was just making about people in digital prioritising on behalf of the entire organisation. These things really need to be set at the appropriate level of an organisation. And I've seen this, in person myself. I've got real experience of this, where actually, I've taken to go and see like an executive director of a large department within a council, shown them the list of work that we're currently working on for them. And they look down this list and they sort of say, why on earth are you doing these things? Because, they're just not strategically important. It may well be that a service manager thinks that a certain improvement is the most important thing in the world. And to that person, it probably is. But always challenge this and think, well, would their boss's boss agree with that? What is the really, really important things that we should be doing? So, we really need to think about how, whose perspective we're taking on some of this kind of stuff. And when we're putting groups together for our decision-making approach, our governance groups and things like that, really need to consider things like, who is in these groups, what's the remit, and what level of influence do these people have? And do they need to be able to make the right decisions at that stage? Prioritisation is an absolute nightmare for pretty much all digital teams, I'm sure, but definitely in council ones. The list of things to do is never ending, and there just aren't enough people to get on with it. So you've always got way more work than you do capacity. Everybody wants everything now, and other stuff keeps cropping up. The first thing I think to accept around this stuff is that it's never going to be perfect. Frankly, in my experience, anything other than a total disaster around prioritisation is pretty good going, in my experience. One thing I would always suggest to people that they don't do is you don't produce like a prioritisation matrix in a spreadsheet where you put numbers in and it will give you an answer. Because what I find is that inevitably, whatever the result of that spreadsheet, human factors will always intervene, and you'll end up sort of overriding the spreadsheet because of something else, some other kind of fact or whatever. So just don't bother with it at all. Would be my thinking. Instead, talk to people, try and reason with them, get those people with conflicting requirements and different needs, priorities in the same room so they can try and understand each other. Get more senior people involved in that, so perhaps they can arbitrate around some of this stuff and they can figure out at a strategic level what is the most important thing to be doing. But I think fundamentally this is about conversations, it's about human beings, it's about figuring stuff out and everybody understanding what each other's needs are, far more than it is about measuring the particular priority of a particular piece of work. Another really, really important factor, I think, of good decision making is documentation and communicating. So, just write stuff down. When we make a decision, any kind of decision, write it down. And so that everybody knows what decision's been made, why it was made, who made it, and perhaps what some of the implications of that decision are going to be. Write it down and then publish them somewhere so that people can see it, so that, if they want to, they can go and find it, bung it on the intranet or some other place that, people see these things. But also send it directly to those people that really need to see it, whether they like it or not. And this is especially true, I think, when you're communicating changes in prioritisation to the people that are affected by that. So that they know that this new corporate emergency is going to take over a higher priority than their service improvement project, and they know there's going to be a delay. And keep up to date that program of work. So whether you call it your backlog, your roadmap, your program, whatever you call it, whether it's in a spreadsheet or some funky sort of online tool, keep that up to date, but most importantly, keep it visible across the organisation, because transparency is the thing that will just revolutionise, I think, decision making and stuff like that around digital work, so that everybody knows what's going on, everybody knows what you're up against. They can check in and they can figure out for themselves where things ought to fit strategically in terms of your priorities. So how do you go about designing a new decision making approach? Well, the first thing is, don't think about it as a process, because it's much more than that. You need to work on this as a proper bit of user-centered service design. And we've got some bullet points here around what that might look like, and this is by no means exhaustive, but what are the user needs for all of those involved and how to best ensure they're met? And don't forget that you are users of this, as the people that are, if you're the people in digital, you are users in terms of this. This needs to be able to work for you, but it also needs to work for those people that are requesting bits of work or wondering where something's got up to, or all of that kind of stuff. So make sure you figure out all the different personas of people that are involved in this process, what their needs are, and how they can be met. Really focus, I think, on what information needs to be gathered when. How is it best kept to absolute minimum, minimum viable sort of information gathering? How can you stage it so that the more complicated a request gets, the more information is requested. But if something genuinely is really simple, you don't need to ask for that much information. So don't overcomplicate things when they don't need to be. What other entirely new activities might be needed around the core process to ensure that the approach works? So this is, again, this thinking around end-to-end service design. A key part of this decision-making process isn't just that the decision gets made, it's the fact that the decision gets communicated, that the decision later on gets reviewed and changed, that, the prioritisation call that you made may well in 6 months' time get amended because of stuff happening, which sort of changes the context. So you need to think about all of those kind of things. Do you need to start having meetings with really senior people to make sure they think the work you're doing for their department is the right things? My answer to that is yes, you do, and make that part of your new approach. And of course, make sure you apply good content and interaction design to this. Oftentimes it's a case of, the cobbler's children having really terrible shoes, but oftentimes, the digital team's own services that they're using often don't have the best content and interaction design on them. So make sure we're applying some of these principles as we would to resident-facing things, public-facing things, as we do to this service that we're talking about here. And obviously, test your assumptions and then iterate based on that feedback. Now, this all might sound quite obvious, but often people just think about this, like Steph said in his Blue Sky post, people just think about this in terms of a process map and a form. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why these things never really seem to work that well. So as I say, I'm just going to reiterate a few things that I think to avoid, which often happens around decision-making approaches. The first one is, I've mentioned it before, spreadsheets that calculate whether something should be good or not. Is this a good idea to do this or not? No matter what numbers these things produce, they always seem to get overridden by human factors, in my experience. So don't bother with it, because it doesn't work. Secondly, having different groups of people making different decisions at different points in the approach, but they all have the same people in those groups every time. Now, this has happened in a few different councils I've worked at, where we had like an operational group, we had a strategic group, we had an architectural group, we had a design authority, and all of which had different roles in a process. The same people were in all those meetings, and we just kind of stared at each other, said the same things, and then went away again. And it was all very, very, Didn't really seem like a great use of our time. Well, let's put it that way. So try and avoid that. Try and keep to an absolute bare minimum the number of different groups that you have in this process. Make sure there are different people in there doing different things for different reasons. If they're not, then just have one meeting or think, do we even need to be talking about this at all? And just try and get rid of it. The third one, I don't really have the perfect answer to, but, discoveries, it's really easy to get into a model about it. So a request could come in for a particular service area. You take a look at what they're asking for and you kind of think, well, I'm not sure about this. I think they need to do some more discovery about this. Chances are, of course, that they've done none whatsoever. And then what does that happen? Do we then sort of commission a discovery to perhaps your user-centered design team to go and do that? Does that happen straight away? What happens to it? What I think probably the right thing to do here, and I'd always be open to hearing what people's experience of this kind of thing is that actually you then create a new request, which is to do this discovery, and then you then prioritise how quickly and when this discovery needs to take place, and then you sort of give that the treatment in the same way as all the other things. I think that feels about right. So you treat the discoveries as a separate thing from the actual doing. And work it through your process that way. Obviously, if you find that doesn't really work for you or for your colleagues, then maybe try and tweak it and do something slightly different. But, discoveries can be a real model, so it's worth giving them some focus. So what I'm going to do now is just share just a quick sort of sample lightweight approach to adapt. So last year, council asked me to take a look at this for them. I tried to produce for them some minimum viable governance, if you like. And this is a quick summary of that. It's based on simplicity and openness. It can be adapted to work in lots of other circumstances, and there's no doubt whatsoever that it can be improved upon. So I'm just going to run through it at a really, really sort of high level now. So the first thing is that you want all requests, no matter what they are, to come through the same route, asking for the most basic information that you possibly can. Find out who the person is. If you don't have to ask them who they are, because you can suck that information in through your Active Directory or something, then that is absolutely perfect. So it reduces the number of questions you're asking. But basically, who are you? What do you want to achieve? And there should be absolutely no exceptions to this, okay? Including the things that your digital people, your IT people, what have you, want to do themselves. They have to do this as well, because everything is going into the same program of work. And it doesn't matter how big or small these things are, it's the same route in. So whether you're asking for a massive digital transformation program or you're asking for a new mouse, it goes in through the same route. It's one funnel, to rule them all, if you like. And then what we would have, and this is some of the bits where, this is where sort of experience kind of comes in, the way that we need to triage those things. And I actually think the best way to triage this is to get a small group of experienced people to really quickly run through these things. And it's not something where you can decide this by job title. I think it's down to individuals. It's down to their experience, their personalities, their knowledge, and everything else, their approaches to things. Because basically what you want these people to be able to do, and it's maybe 3 people, something like that, small group, they meet every week to run through these things. And basically what they're doing is they're giving these requests a sniff, right? Give it a quick sniff. Is it a good idea or not? Should we even be doing this? Is it even realistic? Or do we need to go back and nix it, basically? And then they ask, if they think that this should go ahead, they then ask a question, and there's 2 possible answers. First one is it simple or is it complicated? And there needs to be some kind of sort of a definition of what these things are. But the simple stuff for me is really simple. And this is why you kind of need the people with the experience making this decision. It is the stuff like, I need a new mouse, I need a new laptop, or something like that. Very, very kind of commoditized requests, very, very well understood requirements, things where, we know that this was only going to take a certain amount of time. Perhaps we only need one person to work on this. It's only going to take them a short amount of time. It's not going to escalate. It's not going to get complicated. We know in our guts, this is going to be pretty quick. And that ends up on somebody's work queue or something like that. It avoids the big program of work. So these sort of things that are, perhaps we call them tasks, they're kind of bunged away in a work queue. They're not on the big program. Nobody really cares about them. Everything else is more complicated, and we call those projects. And my view on this is that there should be way, 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 way more projects than there are sort of the more simple tasks. And I think that there should be way more things should be treated as projects than actually are in most teams at the moment. And that is because stuff is just more complicated. If it involves several people, if it involves several days of activity, if it involves back and forth with suppliers, if it needs coordination, if it needs thinking about, if it's just like a drain on attention and that kind of thing, treat it as a project, even if it's a relatively small thing. Get it prioritised, work out who the people you need to work on this are, find out about the technical implications, think about the dependencies and all of that kind of thing, and start gathering some of this information. But it needs to be proportionate to the nature of the work involved, and you need to get all of your disciplines involved in this. So all the people within your digital team, from your architects, your ops people, your developers, your user-centered design people, your product people, your delivery people, all of those kind of folk need to be involved in this. And of course, also those subject matter experts in the services themselves need to be able to talk about it as well and have an input into all of this kind of stuff. What then happens is that all that information should then be gathered in a sort of a project summary type document. Keep it as short as possible, absolutely, because you want people to be able to read these things. So find a way to really refine down all of this input into a very short document. A couple of size of A4, I would imagine, it needs to be maximum. And that then needs to be reviewed by a more senior strategic group of people from across the organisation. So you might call, and I've done this in the past, your small group triaging at the beginning, that's not your operational group, this is your strategic group. So we're now looking at fairly chunky projects. The assumption is that at this stage is that they will go ahead. They're important enough that they do need to go ahead. And this group then makes a decision about, the priority of this work. When is it going to happen? How is it going to slot into the current program of work? Is it going to go straight in at the bottom? Is it going to sort of slot in a bit further up? And if it goes in further up, as a lot of times it's going to, we then communicate out to those people that have been affected by this, and we explain to them what happened, the rationale behind it, and we give them an opportunity to discuss that and to talk to us about the implications of doing that. But what we would hope is that the people within that strategic group have got the knowledge, they've got the sort of the depth of view across the whole organisation, that they're able to understand the implications of those decisions. So hopefully, there'll be robust decisions that will be accepted. And then following this meeting, that whole programme needs to be reviewed with new entries highlighted, and updates need to be made to the senior leadership team to make sure that they understand how the corporate priorities are being reflected in this work programme, and they might then be able to call out and just say, hang on a minute, that thing is really, really important. We need to get that done quick, move it up. And likewise, if something isn't quite so important, they can do that as well. So it feels to me like, the rhythms and the cadence of some of these meetings and these updates. What do I think? I think if you can get the initial triage operational group going weekly, I think that's a good thing. I think if you can get this more strategic group moving monthly, that would work as well, of course. If decisions need to be made a bit more quickly, they can always, exceptional meetings can be called, or they can be done remotely or asynchronously or something like that. And then I think you need at least a quarterly update to your most senior leadership team on these are the projects we're working on. Here's some of the changes we've made to it recently, and they can then give their feedback on all of that kind of thing. And that really is my sort of super high level. There's no form design here. There's no process map. There's nothing like that. But that feels to me like take that framework and adapt it to your needs. Having done some of your user research, having done something your service design thinking to make it work within your context. So coming to the end, summing up. So decision making around digital is really, really important. So please, please, please put the work into making it as good as possible. It is a problem that you can fix as well. Always remember that golden rule around governance and decision making. Make it less work to follow than it is to avoid. That means being proportionate, and it means being user centric in your service design. Remember that prioritization is not the responsibility of a single person or team, and it should be done at as a higher level in the organisation as you can possibly get it. Fundamentally, make everything open and transparent. so that people know what's going on, they know how to change things if they need to, and they need to know what their consequences are if things do change. And remember to eat your own agile dog food. Don't try and design a perfect approach from the get-go. Start small, figure out something that works, and iterate on that and build it up from there would always be my advice. So that's that. Hope it's been useful. Don't forget the Digital Success online course. You can visit the website and book yourself on there if having this kind of an approach with a bit more conversation, a bit more back and forth sounds like the sort of thing you'd like to get involved in, looking at all those different subjects, then do please take a look and sign up. I do think obviously it's an absolute snip at 299 quid. And again, if you've got any feedback on this or you just want to have a chat about something, then do please get in touch. You've got my email address there. You can find me on various places on the internet. You can have a look at my blog where I share interesting things that I see and occasionally interesting things that I think on there. And I do bung out an irregular email newsletter. So if you want to get this stuff direct to your inbox, have a look there and sign up for that. And that is, I think, pretty much everything that I've got to say about decision making. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope it's been useful and see you next time. Bye.